Yolanda, Lori. Hi, everybody. Okay. Why don't we prepare ourselves? Let's create invitation. Invitation is simply to allow ourselves to open up and to become conscious, invitational, to welcome in all of that which wants to lovingly assist us to greater degrees of awareness. It's a beautiful, succinct way in talking about an invocation. Really, it's just an invitation to welcome all that wants to come in and interweave itself in our multiple stages of enlightenment. So here we go. So let's become conscious of that invitation by closing our eyes and taking a deep breath. And we always say take a deep breath, but what we're asking is to explore with the breath. Explore with the breath. Explore perhaps an untapped power that you have that reveals to you that you do have this conscious ability to direct breath to parts of your body that perhaps have been neglected, or that you don't channel that breath consciously to, and nourish the body, breathe the body. And so we just breathe the body in gratitude for returning to the mindful awareness that we do indeed have this consciousness that allows us to direct breath, direct thought, direct choice. And so not only are we excited to return to that level of awareness, but we always deepen a personal vow each time we come to that awareness. We deepen that vow by leaning into the vow more. What is the vow? The vow is the surrendering into returning to home, the surrendering to returning to home, surrendering to returning to the natural state of our own divinity that's never left us. It's just that we are willing now to spiritually exfoliate, to slough off, to remove whatever layers or residue that might play in our forgetfulness. And we can do it playfully. We can do it joyously. We can just honor wherever it is that we are on our path, and we do so now. And as I always like to say, we welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through us. We welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through us. We welcome the power of the ancients to flow through us. And by that I mean flow unencumbered. There's no resistance. We just say, you are welcome here. So the power which has always been within us, it now flows with the wisdom of the ancients that have always resided where we are. And we welcome the love of the ancients to create as us. And with this as our invitation, our opening invite to all that is the highest vibrational of love, we declare our time together good and very good. And we know that the gifts that are shared today are exactly what it is that we need, that no one is here by mistake, that we have simply said yes to a divine appointment, and we are grateful, and so it is. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Well, welcome everybody. I was remembering an event that happened when I was turning 40. A lifetime ago. I had gone to Peru. It was my first time to travel to Peru. I had saved my pennies. Friends had been incredibly generous and thrown me a birthday party, and that contained within that birthday party was donations to help fund my trip that I had long planned, and I was going to expose myself to the longing and the draw to go to this sacred area. And I was there by myself. It was one of those beautiful experiences of feeling not only anonymous, that no one knew me, but feeling totally integrated into everything that was around me. So I felt both both small and big. Small in terms of David Ault personality, but big in terms of the connection to the vibration of Peru. It was magical. And I was in Cusco, and I was walking down an alleyway, and it was very early in the morning. And being someone who loves coffee, I had scoped out where the gringos could go and find some café con leche. And I had found a place that I liked, and so it was very early in the morning, and I had gone there and had a quick bite to eat. But I was walking back down this cobblestoned alley. And as I looked up, and perhaps you've seen, if you've been to Peru or you've seen pictures, you will note that the way in which much of the buildings are constructed is stone on stone, and there is such a small delineation between each stone that you have to marvel at the technology of the way in which they stacked these things. They say that you can barely fit a dime in between each of these stones, and no mortar is used. It's the Peruvian way, the Incan way in which they built. And so it's marvelous to walk down these alleyways and you have all this stacked stone on either side of you. And so that's where I'm at, and I have my coffee. And I look up, and walking towards me at the other end of the alley is an Incan man who is in full regalia, almost as if he is a king, a leader. There is a headpiece. There are all of the accoutrements that go on his cuffs and his arms and his legs and the feathers and the costume. And I didn't think anything about it in that moment because I was there in the month of June. And in the month of June, there happened to be so many different celebrations. There was something happening in the main square of Cusco just about every day. Some parade, some dance, some performance. And so I immediately thought that, oh, this is someone that is preparing to go to the main square to participate in some festivity. But the closer he came to me, the more the goosebumps on my arms and in fact my whole body kind of popped out. And as I looked at him, I thought, this doesn't appear to be a costume. This appears to be something really ancient, authentic. And the closer we were coming into the alleyway and the closer that I came to facing him, the more my hair stood up on end. And it wasn't from a sense of danger, it was from a sense of awe and the presence. And I looked at him, and his face was majestic and weathered, and but just beautiful. And he simply bowed to me, and I in turn just bowed back to him. And I kept walking, and of course I couldn't help myself. I had to, after I got a few steps past him, had to turn around to see him once again. And when I turned around, there was no one there. There was no one there. There was no intersecting alleyway. There was no doorway for this presence to have turned into. I would say that it was one of those rare, palpable experiences of experiencing what I call thin space. Thin space is a definition that is given to that experience where the delineation between heaven and earth is so thin that you can't differentiate it. You could think about it as the multidimensionality influencing this one-dimensional experience. You could think about it as the microcosm of God, Spirit, Divine, saturating itself and making itself tangibly known within the microcosm. And in that experience of seeing that Incan elder, it was a tangible experience of the thin space. I saw a glimpse of heaven. And I've always revered that memory. But I've also come to love the term thin space as a teaching tool. Because every time that you and I delve into spiritual matters, every time that we discuss God as the ultimate, the all in all, every time we talk about spirit or the divine or the macrocosm or the quantum field of infinite potentiality, when all of that is discussed, you must understand, and I include myself in this, that it can be very conceptual. There isn't perhaps a tangibility to it because it feels as though it is intangible. And I believe that when we gain some morsel of the intangible form, that we then step into a role of responsibility in not only remembering that in the day to day, not only remembering that in the mundane, not only remembering that in the illusionary experience of the one single dimension, but there's a responsibility that comes in assisting other people to also have a taste of the intangible as tangible. Did you follow that? It means that as teachers, and we are all teachers and we are all students, but when we step into this teaching platform, it comes with a high calling, a responsibility. And you are a teacher when you go to the grocery store and you interact with the clerk. You are a teacher when you guide and aid your children. You are a teacher when you are with your coworkers and you listen compassionately to their pain. You are a teacher. You are a teacher. You are a teacher. You are a teacher every single time you enter out into the world. And we are also students. But in that role of teacher, our utmost calling, if you will, our highest calling, is to make people more aware of the intangible as the tangible. And so it's about living in the thin space as much as possible. It's about realizing that the thin space is there. There's a great Ram Dass quote that says, all you can do for another person is be an environment in which, if they wanted to come up for air, they could. Let me read that again. All you can do for another person is to be an environment in which, if they wanted to come up for air, they could. And what Ram Dass is sharing here, and what he's inviting us to consider, is that all that we can do for another person is to be an environment of thin space, an environment where something conceptual can be felt and integrated into daily life. That it doesn't have to be reserved for something fantastical like walking down an alleyway in Peru. And so I realized that I may have handicapped you by starting with that kind of story. Because suddenly when you hear a story like that, you might say, oh, well, that hasn't happened to me, or it may never happen to me. But I illustrate that, I offer that up as an example, because sometimes we have to hear the large macrocosm in order to move down into a micro consideration. And so, as a teacher today, in this moment, I say, don't compartmentalize the experience of the thin space. Don't say that it has to be and look a certain way. That every single day the thin space exists. Heaven on earth is not reserved for some spectacular thing. Heaven and earth, the combination of that, is a part of the reawakening of what truth is, that heaven is not in the future. Whatever you're calling heaven, whatever you're defining as heaven, is consciousness. And the consciousness of that is the thing that is trying to get our attention, if you will. Why? because you are born of consciousness. You were born as an instrument and an example of the divine. And so we come through this embryonic fluid, if you will, that contains within it levels of forgetfulness. And people often ask, well, why do we have to have the soul journey anyway? Why do we have to continue to incarnate and do this over and over and over again and navigate our way through this illusionary field, this curriculum, this pain, this suffering, this insight, this loss? Why do we have to have that? Well, that experience, that rebirthing through yet another embryonic fluid that kind of re-energizes the thing all over again, is a way in which the intangible can become more tangible in form. How else would you and I be able to cultivate consciousness or to experience consciousness unless we went through this process? And yes, there will come a time when the process will no longer be necessary, that the isness of that which is, the God, we will have returned to. But our beingness, our soul, goes on an infinite journey, an infinite cycle of the illusion. And in these illusions, of which we are in one, we are here, we are designed to practice welcoming, seeing, living, teaching, experiencing thin space. And so, what are some of the ways that we do that? Well, that's where a real spiritual tool comes into play. And by a spiritual tool, I mean something, some practice, some devotional tool, and of which there are countless, that we go to in order to make the thin space experience more pronounced, more visible. You know, I was long held in a tradition, a spiritual tradition, a divinity path, that would say things like, you know, there is no such thing as luck, because luck would indicate that there wasn't something external outside of me that was governing my experience. And in my metaphysical teachings, we are schooled in the idea that there is no dualistic experience between me and a deity, that which we term God, that which we feebly aim to describe as the all, is what I'm a part of. I'm actually absorbed in it. And there's no level of forgetfulness that will ever disattach me, is that a word? Unattach me from that all. Do you follow? And so I can go through incarnation after incarnation after incarnation, living totally in the illusion that I am separate, of never really even realizing the integration that heaven is here in this experience. I can live by a dogma, a religion that tells me that I am nothing. But then I can have incarnations where I reawaken to my origin. And I can realize then that I could say with integrity, you're right, there is no such thing as luck, because that would say that something, some external thing was having to choose for me, or was governing whether or not I was worthy enough to have these things. And so in saying I don't believe in luck, I can say what I believe in, what I believe in, and I wrote it down because I thought it was funny. I believe in optimum ordinaries. I believe in optimum ordinaries, meaning that this existence of being in the thin space constantly, whether I'm conscious of it or not, when I wake up, when I have insight, when I get clarity, when I can feel the tangibility of God as all that there is, then I'm having an optimal ordinary, because that's the reality. That's capital R reality. It's not reserved for a special occasion like luck. And so one of the other tools, then, one of the mainstays is prayer. And the idea of prayer has had a diversion of being one-dimensional prayer. By one-dimensional prayer, it means that we are perceiving something as wrong. We are perceiving something as separate from the desired state. Call it God. We are experiencing in small r, we are experiencing it, and so it feels very real. But what the thin space would invite us to do is that instead of praying at the level of one dimension, which is fix this, oh, I want this to go away, or let me bargain with you, God that I don't understand, or God that I fear. Let me bargain with you. Let me ask for some good luck. We would petition, we would beseech in this form of prayer, which so many religions participate in, but it's one-dimensional. But what if, as a tool to help reawaken, a tool to help us remember, we prayed multidimensionally. We prayed as the integration of heaven and earth. And so what would that prayer look like? That prayer would have no doubt. That's a tall order, isn't it? That prayer would not secretly have our fingers crossed behind our backs, hoping that the thing that we were praying for, the affirmation or the declaration, may or may not happen. We would pray from a multidimensional awareness that understands that order is everywhere. But before you take this and then confuse it with getting what you want when you want it, that's not what I mean by the affirmation of prayer or the multidimensionality of prayer. The multidimensionality of prayer is simply declaring. And if this was the only prayer that you ever prayed, as Meister Eckhart said, it would sound like this: thank you. So you would look at the illusion and you would say, thank you. That's a prayer. You would look at the seeming falling, the seeming chaos, and you would say, thank you. Now those words might come out as, I celebrate God in all things. I see God in all things. I recognize God in all things. Thank you. If that's the only prayer that we ever uttered, then that would be the most exquisite, multi-dimensional prayer. That would be a prayer birthed in the thin space. And so you see, no matter how bad it gets, on the surface or in the illusion, the cycle of incarnation that we are all in, the thin space is still there. And isn't it fascinating how large and noisy and seductive the one-dimensional experience can be? And every master and every teacher that we revere, it seems as though we revere them from a place of exception, meaning that we put them here on some pedestal, and then we sit here at the foot of them, and we are devout to them, and we look up to them. But there is still that dualistic separation where the thought goes, but I can't get there. I'm unworthy. I'm not good enough. And that then takes this thin space and it keeps widening the chasm. It keeps distancing us from actually experiencing the thin space. And we love to be in the presence of these teachers, but we still remain in the forgetfulness that their wisdom is our wisdom. That their connection to God is our connection to God, because it's all one organism. And so there's ways to be in communion with a teacher, with a sage, with a wisdom keeper, and to listen and to glean and to learn. And there is always an invitation to know that the best teacher, the brightest, the most clear, the most succinct, the most integrous teacher would be the one that says, you know this as well. Let's all keep reawakening to greater depths and greater depths and greater depths and greater depths. Let us all have our experience of the thin space, whether we are walking down an alley in Peru or whether we are on the chaotic streets of Manhattan or on a country road. No matter where it is, that thin space exists. That thin space exists within the polling place that you go and you cast your vote. That thin space exists on the demonstration lines in the streets as we advocate for equality. That thin space is there, but we must give ourselves to it. We must pray. We must pray multidimensionally before we enter into any activity with the prayer, thank you. God is here. Heaven is here. You are welcomed. You are received. You are allowed. So the prayer doesn't have to be some big poetic thing. In fact, I think the most genius prayer is the prayer that is the most simple, that just recognizes the infallible presence of the thin space, of heaven as now. And so it's seductive to want to complicate it. It's easy sometimes to give our power away to a supposed sage or teacher. Again, nothing wrong with it. But don't let your wings become clipped by the codependency of feeling that you are incapable. The way in which we help one another is by examining and becoming curious as to why the veil is so thick between my experience of the thin space. To be more and more willing day after day to let an old story die, to shed an old identity, to become lighter, to let the grudge or the melodrama or the fear of being alone, the fear of not being worthy enough, the fear of losing one's health, the fear of all of those things, and realizing, yes, we understand that those are things that are a part of the small r curriculum, small r reality curriculum. And yet, those are invitations. Those fears are not things to push away. They are fears, they are things, they are signals to welcome us back to the practice of the multidimensional prayer and going, thank you, God is all that there is. And so, yeah, we have our good days. We have our good moments. And I, just like you, have my bad days and my bad moments. But isn't it beautiful when we can swim in the fluid of reciprocity? And when you need a hand, I can offer it. And I know that when I need a hand, you can offer it. And that's the way we live this life. That's the way we live this life.